On June 14, 1969, the Martin family was on a camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee, along with another family they were friends with. There were four of them: William Martin, his father Clyde Martin, and his two sons Douglas and 6-year-old Dennis. At one point on the trip, the other family was returning from a hike, and when they could hear them coming, little Dennis decided he wanted to play a little prank. So he ran down the trail a little bit and hid in the woods so he could jump out and surprise them. 5 minutes or so passed, and the other family came walking into the camp, but Dennis wasn't with them. When asked, they said they never saw him. William and Douglas immediately went looking for Dennis, but he was nowhere to be found. They searched down the trail for up to 2 miles, poking into the woods and calling his name the whole way, but he was just gone. After hours of searching, they sought help from the park rangers, but by the end of the day, there was still no trace of Dennis. In the following days and weeks, everyone from the National Guard to the Green Berets to the Boy Scouts joined in the search. Over 1,400 volunteers helped scour a 50-square-mile area of the park in one of the largest missing persons hunts in history up to that point. But despite all of that, Dennis Martin was never seen again. The Dennis Martin story is one of hundreds of stories of people disappearing in national parks across the United States, so much so that the phenomenon has a name: Missing 411. So today we're going to examine a few stories from the Missing 411 archive and see exactly what's going on here. We'll take a look at some of the theories around it, and I'll, chime in on what I think is happening. Some of you may not like it. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Missing 411. It gets requested a lot on this channel. It's fairly popular on Reddit and YouTube, and there are some interesting theories around it, which we'll get into. The term itself was coined by author and former police officer David Polich, who wrote a series of books on what he believes is a pattern of mysterious disappearances in wilderness areas. Now, there are a lot of missing persons cases. They're not uncommon. In fact, they're kind of disturbingly common. Around 600,000 people are reported missing in the United States every year, which is insane. But Missing 411 cases are different. These are ones that specifically happen in wilderness areas and national parks, and they often have weird circumstances that defy explanation. Like places where people go to hike and camp and fish. Water is actually a pretty common theme on these things. And they do seem to cluster around specific places like Yosemite and the Grand Canyon. Sometimes these people disappear and no trace of them is ever found. Sometimes remains are found years later, but they're nowhere near where they vanished. And sometimes remains appear, but they show up in places that were already thoroughly searched beforehand. And every once in a while, someone will be found alive, but they're in a peculiar physical or mental state, often with no memory of what happened to them. But the cases do seem to have what I can only describe as a unifying strangeness to them, which has led to all kinds of theories and speculation. Some of them are reasonable, and some are pretty out there. There's far too much for me to cover in one video, and there's no shortage of content on YouTube about this. I could point you to the Lore Lodge and Coast to Coast AM if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, but today I'm just going to focus on a few of them and let you decide. Let's start with a case that I've already mentioned, that of Dennis Martin, or Denny to his family. 55 years later, this case still has plenty of unanswered questions. Questions like, how does a healthy 6-year-old vanish so close to a busy campsite? And so quickly? And so quietly? How can more than 1,400 volunteers, including Green Berets and even Boy Scouts, fail to find any trace of him? Well, it turns out there was actually one possible trace. There was a set of footprints that they found that they think belonged to Denny. The prints were the right size to be Denny's, and they also resembled the tread of the shoes that Denny was wearing. But the tracks contained one shoe print and one barefoot, which definitely suggested the person who made those tracks was in potential trouble. Hiking with only one shoe on is not exactly a common thing. But the officials at the time thought that the tracks belonged to one of the searchers who were looking for Denny, so they didn't give it much attention at the moment. Probably a mistake, but all these years later it's kind of impossible to know. Another possible bit of evidence came out way later when a guy who was illegally hunting ginseng claimed to have found a child-sized skeleton in the area, but when the officials went looking for it, the remains were gone. But this guy didn't come forward with that until 1985. Apparently he was afraid of being prosecuted for illegal ginseng hunting. I guess, is that a big deal? Now, as for other evidence, there probably could have been a lot more out there, but there just happened to have been a rainstorm the night after he disappeared that might have washed it away. Now, a big part of the problem with Denny's disappearance is actually the massive scale of the search effort itself. 1,400 people is a lot of people. And many of those people were untrained volunteers who didn't, know what to look for or how to maintain the integrity of the search area. Like any footprints that might have survived that rainstorm were probably stomped all over by the 1,400 people looking for them. The Park Service actually changed their search protocols after the Denny Martin disappearance for this very reason. That did not, unfortunately, put an end to people going missing in national parks. In July of 2015, another child went missing from a campsite in Idaho. This one's name was DeOrr Kunz Jr., and it was actually featured in the documentary about Missing 411 by David Polich and his son Ben. There have been a few of these documentaries by now. This was the first one that came out in 2016. The story goes that 2-year-old DeOrr Kunz Jr. vanished from a campsite near Timber Creek Campground near Leodore, Idaho in July of 2015. DeOrr's parents, Vernal Kunz and Jessica Mitchell, took him on an impromptu camping trip along with Jessica's grandpa, Robert Walton, and a friend of Robert's, a guy named Isaac Reinwand. So according to their story, after they set up camp, Vernal and Jessica went out to a nearby store for supplies, and then upon returning, they all decided to walk down to a creek to check out a spot for fishing. All of them except Grandpa Bob. He was 76 years old, he was on oxygen, his health wasn't great, so he chose to stay behind. Initially, DeOrr started down the path with his parents, but then he decided he wanted to stay with Grandpa, so Jessica sent him running back up the short path to Robert, shouted at him to let him know that DeOrr was coming his way. After scouting the river for a short amount of time, in some retellings they said it was only 5 minutes, in others they said 15 to 20, Jessica says that she found a fish in the river that she thought DeOrr would like, so she walked back up the path to where Grandpa Bob was. But when she got there, not only was she surprised to not see DeOrr, but Grandpa Bob claimed that he never came back. Somehow, in the literal handful of seconds that he was out of eyesight on that path back to Grandpa, DeOrr Kunz disappeared, and he was never seen again. An extensive modern search was conducted, but no trace of DeOrr was ever found. No body, no clothing, and no boots. I bring up the boots because Isaac told investigators that DeOrr's boots were way too big for him and ill-fitting, meaning that, well, a couple of things. One, he wouldn't be able to move very fast and probably couldn't have gotten very far with those boots on. And also, if somebody or something picked him up, those boots probably would have fallen off. Not to mention, nobody heard any screaming or distress if he had been picked up by a person or an animal. For all intents and purposes, it's like DeOrr Kunz just vanished off the face of the earth. And to this day, nobody's figured out why. One last story I'll cover here, thankfully doesn't involve a child, but it's pretty famous on the internet and YouTube, and that's the story of Kenny Veach. Not only was Kenny not a child, he was also an experienced hiker who regularly traveled the Nevada desert. Occasionally he would document this on his YouTube channel under the name Snakebit McGee. To be clear, he wasn't like a full-time YouTuber or anything, he mostly made videos about inventions he wanted to get on Shark Tank. But 10 years ago, he shared a story in the comments of somebody else's video that sparked a lot of debate. His claim was that he had recently found a cave in the deserts outside Las Vegas that seemed to emanate some kind of strange energy or vibration that he couldn't explain. As tends to happen in comment sections, people called his bluff and asked him for his location, asked him for proof, but he couldn't provide any. It seems he couldn't remember the exact location of this cave, which of course led many of them to call him a liar. What he did remember vividly was that the opening of the cave was shaped like the letter M. Yes, the infamous M-shaped cave. That argument in the comment section is sadly no longer available, but Kenny was determined to go back to the cave with a video camera and prove him wrong. And on October 18th of 2014, he did exactly that.
Well, here I am, and I'm looking for a cave that I found, and I didn't have a sidearm when I was here before, and something about that cave just spooked me. Out of all the caves I've ever gone in, this one just made my body vibrate. The closer I got to it, the crazier my body felt, and I was like, all right, I'm not going to go in there right now, but I'm coming back someday. Hopefully I'll find it. It's shaped like a big M. It's a big cave that looks just like a gigantic M, and it's about as tall as I am and kind of narrow.
Throughout the rest of the video, which has now racked up 3.6 million views, Kenny walks the Mojave Desert looking for the cave. And while he finds other caves, and previous mines and man-made structures, and mountain goats, and tortoises, and edible desert nuts, he never crosses paths with the M cave. Obviously this didn't help his case with the skeptics, but he remained undeterred, and he avowed in a comment that he was going to go out there again, this time for a whole weekend. He was going to find this cave. That comment was the last thing the internet heard from Kenny Veach. At the time of this video, Kenny Veach has been missing for just over 10 years. Here's what we know. On November 10th, Kenny told his family he was going out for a short overnight trip, and then he never came back. Authorities were contacted and a search began. On November 22nd, his cell phone was found, and it was actually sitting on the platform of that very mine shaft where he recorded that video. Searchers looked inside the mine, thinking, maybe he had fallen in there, but he wasn't there. Not him, none of his clothes or equipment. In fact, no other trace of him was ever found. Interestingly, his video camera was found back at his home, which is actually kind of strange considering the whole reason he was going out there was to find proof of that cave. But the strangeness of that original comment, along with the strangeness of his disappearance, not to mention the fact that he was fairly close to Area 51, it's led to a lot of speculation. In fact, the original comment that he left about that cave was in reference to someone's story about Area 51. So while his disappearance was mysterious, there's no mystery why this story has become one of the most popular internet mysteries of all time. Mysteries are fun. I like mysteries. Do you like mysteries? So I've covered a lot of mysteries on this channel, and if you'll forgive me for veering off topic for just a second, there's this project that I've been working on for like well over a year now, and I'm really excited to finally make it public. It is a book. It is the first book of this channel, and it's a book of mysteries, and it's called The Answers of Joe Book of Mysteries. It's a compilation of some of the most popular mystery topics we've covered on this channel over the years, complete with original illustrations, some updates on some of the topics, and a few topics that I've never covered before. So we're making it available for pre-sale this Friday. That's Black Friday, the 29th. And the best way to get it is through the newsletter. We're going to have a crazy discount for newsletter people. We're going to announce it there first and take it wide later on. But if you want first access to it and a crazy discount, just scan this here QR code or go to thatjoescott.com/newsletter. It costs nothing to sign up. It takes like 5 seconds. You can always unsubscribe later, but that's where we're going to be first announcing it, and you'll get a big discount for it. We'll be making it more public later on. But anyway, I'm super excited to finally get that out there. Thank you for indulging me and letting me talk about it. But for now, I'll shut up. Let's get back to the missing 411 thing. So those are just a handful of stories. Like I said, there's hundreds of them out there. I think 1,400 at last count. So if you have a favorite one, feel free to share it down in the comments. And hell, point to a video to it. I don't mind. But it's led a lot of people to look for explanations and to search for a common cause. Some people see an organized group behind it involved in kidnapping, possibly human trafficking. Some blame it on mysterious, unknown predators or cryptids. Some, of course, see alien abductions. Others find more exotic explanations like mysterious energy vortexes or time slips or portals. One thing that all the proponents do tend to agree on is that whatever it is, the government's covering it up. And a lot of them lay the blame on the National Park Service. Which, I mean, you guys know I'm not a conspiracy bro or anything, but I could definitely understand why the Park Service would want to kind of downplay any risks that paying visitors might face. And I think it's that sort of sense that something is being kept from us, you know, that helps fuel the wilder theories around missing 411. That, and the people who keep kind of pushing the idea, people like David Paulides. David Paulides is a former police officer turned author and filmmaker who began researching missing persons cases in national parks after an off-duty park ranger suggested to him that something foul was afoot. So he dove into the subject and began to see what he thought were connections between these cases and similarities that were just too weird to ignore. He actually worked in the detective department at the San Jose PD back in the day, so to his detective nose, something didn't smell right. So he coined the term missing 411 and began writing books. The first one was published in 2012, which is actually a two-parter, one that covered the eastern U.S. and one that covered the western U.S. And then he just kind of basically just cranked out books every year after that until about 2020. In between books, he produced 3 different documentaries with his son, Ben Paulides, including Missing 411 in 2017, Missing 411 The Hunted in 2019, and in 2022, Missing 411 The UFO Connection. Yeah, now might be a good time to point out that before he wrote the Missing 411 books, he wrote 2 books on Bigfoot. So he's always had a bit of a chubby for the woo-woo stuff. The fact that he's a former police detective lends him a lot of credibility, but I should also point out that in 1996 he was charged with a misdemeanor for fraudulently soliciting for a charity. Another way of saying that is that he scammed people. Now, to be fair to David, you know, writing a book about Bigfoot or researching Bigfoot, that doesn't automatically make you a quack, and I've always been a bit of a paranormal file myself, but I too tend to be more skeptical of people whose whole thing is selling a certain worldview or an idea, because there's just too much monetary incentive to ignore evidence to the contrary. And he has certainly created a cottage industry around missing 411. And his methods and ideas have been questioned by skeptics. One of the first to really challenge the missing 411 thing was Kyle Polich from the Monterey County Skeptic Society, who gave a talk about missing 411 in 2017, just as the first books came out. He dug into the stories in the book and found that, you know, some information was left out, some details were incorrect, and pointed out that for a lot of these cases, while they may make creepy stories, they all have a potential for logical explanations. And he found that some of the wild connections that he makes are tenuous, to say the least. For example, in the case of Amy Bechtel, who disappeared in the Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming, Politis found one amazing coincidence that he felt was really important to point out.
He goes on in this case to say, Amy Wagner also went missing from this area in 2005. Both their names start with an A, and their first names only have 3 letters.
I'm going to stop short of calling Politis a scam artist or a grifter or a BS artist or anything like that. He may truly believe in all this, but I will say that some of these stories just really don't pass the Occam's razor test for me, including the stories that I talked about earlier. For example, in the DeOrr Kunz case that I was talking about a minute ago, a lot of attention has been paid to the parents, suggesting that maybe they killed him on purpose or accidentally, but either way, they staged the camping trip just as an alibi. In fact, the sheriff investigating the case did name them as a person of interest at one point. Yeah, apparently it was a very unplanned trip. It was very impromptu. Out of nowhere, they decided to do this thing. And while they claimed to have had DeOrr with them when they went to that store to pick up supplies, the store employees apparently didn't see him. Which does, though, beg the question of why they would have 2 people with them, unless they just needed some credible witnesses, but that would imply that Grandpa Bob and Isaac were in on it too. Grandpa Bob passed away a few years later, so he's not around to defend himself. Isaac has apparently maintained his story this whole time. Some have argued that their behavior and the way they speak in interviews after the event were kind of strange. I don't really want to go there because, people grieve differently. Plus, there is a way to explain it in a way that absolves the parents, like the fact that Grandpa Bob, who was supposed to be watching DeOrr, he was showing signs of dementia. He may not have heard Jessica calling out to him, and he may have had no idea that he was supposed to be watching him. Also, DeOrr was 2 years old. Anybody with a 2-year-old knows they can get distracted and run away really quickly, like 2-year-olds do. So if he did that and ran off the path, there was a river close by. Like I mentioned before, that's one of the recurring elements in a lot of these stories. They often happen around water, where people drown and get swept away. As for the Kenny Veach story, of course, explanations around this have been all over the map. Many speculated that he did find the cave and what was inside kind of did him in. And that means everything from a cryptid to an evil Native American spirit to some advanced technological device or aliens. Its proximity to Area 51 doesn't help with those. Which, of course, if it was some kind of secret government thing, then maybe he was silenced. But Kenny's ex-girlfriend came forward with a very plausible, if sad, explanation. Her name is Sharon Pilgrim, and she commented on his in-cave video that she believes that, unfortunately, Kenny took his own life. She points out that his father left the same way when Kenny was young, and apparently he was having some financial difficulties. And maybe that's part of why he spent so much time hiking in the desert, was because he was really struggling with some mental issues. The fact that he left his camera behind says to her that he wasn't really going out there to find anything, that he was going out there to disappear, and that he left his phone at the mine so that nobody could track him. There's also the possibility that he maybe didn't end his life, but maybe disappeared and started a new one. Yeah, a weird addendum to this story is an event that happened in 2018 where there was a burglary of a Reiki center owned by his sister, Debbie Veach. It had to be a Reiki center, didn't it? Anyway, some believe, including Kenny's sister-in-law Susan, that the man in the CCTV footage is Kenny. He knew exactly where to find the iPad that he stole, and he even grabs one of his knees at one point, which is the same knee that Kenny had injured on a previous hike. Also, all he did was break in and steal the iPad, which is kind of weird. This story was covered in a video by the EWU Unsolved where they interviewed her. It's also been covered by the Urbex Hill guys. You guys should check them out. Actually, there's a plethora of videos that have covered this story. But as Sharon Pilgrim is right, and he did decide to end his own life, this kind of makes me think of that Peter Bergman story that I covered a while back. Some people do go out of their way to just disappear when they decide to end their lives, kind of as a way to spare family and friends from having to deal with the aftermath. Which, by the way, this might be an explanation for a lot of the missing 411 cases. People go into the woods with the intention to disappear. I personally know a guy who did that. He went out to the woods and by the side of a river, and he waited for the river to rise before he shot himself so that it would wash him away. It's certainly not a solution that people want for stories like this, but it's also definitely something that happens. So, the missing 411 thing is not new to me. In fact, I have the book. This is one of the first 2 books. I said there was one. The first one was a 2-parter. This is the one for the Western United States and Canada. This was actually gifted to me by the very first fan meetup that I ever had in New York. This is way, way, way early on. There were only 2 people that showed up. But one of them, and I want to say his name was Marco. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But yeah, he gave me this book. So yeah, I've known about this for a really long time, and it gets requested a lot, like I said, but I've never really covered it before because, if I'm being honest, I just don't think there's anything to it. I'm sorry. I just don't. Like, there's a phrase that I heard a while back about deep sea diving. It's that when you go into the ocean, you re-enter the food chain. And I think that applies to the wilderness as well. Like, we as a species have become, like, so disconnected from the natural world. We're so used to living in an environment that we built for ourselves and our own comfort and safety that we forget nature doesn't work like that. Like, yes, there are wild predators, that can attack you, but also just uneven ground and trees with pointy branches you can fall on and poisonous things, and it's easy to get lost. There are no right angles like you're used to. There's extreme temperatures and a lack of water or food. There's sinkholes and fissures and ravines and rivers and nobody that can help you. Or sometimes there are people around, but they have bad intentions. And if some accident does befall you, nature will quickly remove any and all evidence. I mean, serial killers don't hide their bodies in the middle of a busy street. They take them to the woods. The wilderness is beautiful, and nature is amazing, but it has its risks. I mean, that's part of the allure. And national parks are the most frequented wilderness spots, especially by amateur adventurers who are not exactly survival experts. Like, my wife and I actually had a pretty scary story ourselves. We went to Woodstock, Vermont in the fall a couple years ago. We wanted to see the leaves turn, and it was beautiful. But nearby, there was a national park called the Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller National Park. I think it's actually the smallest national park in the United States. I should preface this story by saying there's really not a whole lot to this, but it still was freaky as hell. Like, we got there, and at first there was this nice paved trail we're walking along. It's, like, really wide. There's people everywhere. There were almost too many people there. But at one point, we kind of went off that trail. We had the All Trails map open, and I was trying to find an overlook spot that could look down on the town. It turns out when we got there, the trees had grown up, so there was no vista, which kind of sucked. But I had this All Trails app on my phone, and I saw a little trail that would look like a shortcut to get back to the main trail, so we kind of went that way. But next thing you know, we didn't know if we were on the trail or not. All of these beautiful leaves that we went there to see had fallen and covered the trails. And on top of that, somehow, like I said before, there were so many people it was annoying. Out of nowhere, we were just like all on our own. There were no people anywhere. We couldn't hear anybody. We couldn't hear a highway. It's like we're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And then the sun started going down. We were on one side of a hill, and the sun went down on the other side of the hill. And as soon as that happened, the temperature dropped quickly. It started getting dark really quickly. We couldn't find the trail, and the battery was running out on my phone, and it started to get really freaking scary. Eventually, I did find, like, the markings on the trees that indicated the trail. Still couldn't see the trail on the ground. We were just walking over leaves. But we started, like, moving really fast. The whole time I was thinking, please, God, don't, like, twist an ankle or something, because, like, there would be no way to get out of there. Thankfully, we finally did get to the main trail, and we made it out, and we were safe and everything. But, I mean, there were some real Blair Witch vibes going on there. And again, this was the smallest national park in America, and I had a cell phone signal and everything. Like, we were going to be fine, but it still was pretty freaking terrifying. So there's a map that may or may not be in the thumbnail of this video, but it shows the locations of missing 411 cases overlaid on top of a map of cave systems in the United States. And they line up pretty perfectly. Now, I know this map has been criticized because it doesn't show all the missing 411 cases, just kind of cherry picks the ones that are around cave systems, but still, that's a lot. But accurate or not, this map is a bit of a litmus test, because there's a group of people that might see this map and say, well, obviously people are getting lost in cave systems. I mean, they're caves. But there's another type of person who might see this map and say that it's proof of Bigfoot or some other cryptid that's living in the cave and feeding on people, or it's proof of secret government underground stuff, or that it's a parking lot for alien Tic Tacs or demons from hell or whatever it is they believe in. And I think that's what gets me about the missing 411 thing, because, like, does everything have to be a conspiracy theory? Like, can't we just accept that it's a random, chaotic world and sometimes bad things just happen? Like, I'm sure if you made a map of drowning victims in California, you'll find clusters of them around beaches. What aren't the beaches telling us? If you put up a map of heat stroke victims, it would probably be a cluster in the Southwest. Well, that's just big desert trying to kill us all. I would make the joke that because most people die in hospitals, that there must be some kind of conspiracy amongst hospitals to kill people, but to some people, that's not a joke. They actually believe that. And yes, people are more likely to go missing in wilderness areas, including national parks. And each one is a tragedy. Each one is a family experiencing grief and loss. And Politis' strongest critics might accuse him of exploiting and profiting off of other people's tragedies. And I don't want to completely go there. I do think there's an ethical gray area there, but let's just be honest, there's an entire industry around the true crime thing, so it would apply to all of that as well. I will say, though, as critical as I might have been in this video about David Politis, he did suffer a tragedy of his own recently. His son, Ben, who produced the documentaries with him, he took his own life in 2021. And that's awful, and my heart goes out to the Politis family. And David did kind of step back from Missing 411 after that. That might just be him grieving, but I can't help but wonder if maybe having experienced this loss himself makes him think a bit more about the grief and loss that those families are going through, and that maybe having this loss saddled with a conspiracy theory, maybe that's just not something he's comfortable with anymore. Or maybe he's just retired. He's well into his 70s now. But anyway, this video is likely to split the crowd a bit. I know people who are into the Missing 411 thing are like really into it, but I try to be objective here. I wasn't kidding, by the way. There is so much content out there around this, from people who are way more skeptical about it than I am to some real wackadoodle. So discuss respectfully down below. Feel free to share videos from other creators. I'll link a few in the description as well. Share your favorite Missing 411 stories. I'm sure there'll be lively conversations around this. But you know one conspiracy that is true? It's how shaving companies all over the world conspired to fleece all of us with their overpriced cartridge razors. See, what they did was they sold a handle that was super cheap, and you think, hey, what a great deal. But the thing is, you have to keep buying these cartridges to put on the handle. And sure, they started off somewhat reasonable, but 2 blades turned into 2 blades with a lubricating strip, then 2 blades with a lubricating strip, and now little shock absorbers underneath, and now you've got 3 blades, and then 4 blades, and 5 blades, and all these innovations just bump up the price a little more, and next thing you know, you're paying $5 for a blade, $30 to buy a package of them. It's like homecoming mums in Texas. It's ridiculous. And the worst part is, they don't even work better. In fact, they work worse because we use them way past the point where they should be replaced because they're so friggin' expensive. Yeah, why shave with 1 dull blade when you can shave with 5 dull blades? That's great for the skin. Thankfully, the people at Henson Shaving want to help stop that cycle. Henson Shaving is a hot little startup that's disrupting the shaving industry by basically being giant nerds. And it's amazing. They've invested heavily in groundbreaking research on the physics and physiology of shaving, and they've created a one-of-a-kind razor that's even better for your skin than the cartridge razors, but it does it with just 1 blade. And they've got the receipts to prove it. But all the aerospace precision and research in the world doesn't matter if you're not using a fresh blade. Henson's data suggests that over 80% of people shave with dull blades. Honestly, you should probably just get in the habit of putting in a new blade every Monday. And Henson feels so strongly about the importance of fresh blades for the health of your skin that they are now offering people free blades for life. For a one-time cost of $50, they will basically send you a blade per week for 50 years. Seriously, for the amount of money you could expect to spend in the next 5 or 6 months on cartridge razors, you could go the rest of your life and never buy blades again. I want to make this extra clear. This is not a subscription that you keep paying into and they send you blades in exchange for it. No, you pay once and it's blades for life. That's a bonkers deal, and they're an amazing company, so I do suggest you go check that out. By the way, the holidays are coming up. They do make a great gift. Just saying. Like, imagine buying someone on your list not only a quality razor, but the gift of never having to pay for shaving ever again. Just saying. You can even indicate that it's a gift, so Henson will make sure to send the free blades to the right person. So go to hensonshaving.com/savingwithjoe, and you'll get a free shaving cream, even if you sign up with a free Blades for Life deal. They're a great company. They have been an amazing partner with this channel, so yeah, go check them out. All right, thanks so much for watching. If this is your first time here, I'm going to share a link to that Peter Bergman video that I was talking about. If you love mysteries, it's a good one. It's kind of a sad mystery. I kind of gave away the ending earlier, but it's a great story. It's one of my favorite videos that I've done. So if you like mystery stuff, I would go check that out. Or, you know, check out any of the videos on the sidebar or underneath, wherever you're watching it. Any of them that have my face on them. Give them a look, and if you enjoy them, I do come back every Monday, so I invite you to subscribe. Big thanks to the Answer Files on Patreon and the channel members who are supporting this channel with their money and forming an awesome community. I can't thank you guys enough. And also, any of you guys, if you're not watching on Nebula, I shared some extra stuff there. I always have a little extra fact that I sprinkle in at the end. And you can see it without any ads, so go check out Nebula too. But that's it for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, especially if you're in the woods. And if you're traveling for Thanksgiving, have a safe travel, have a great, happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you guys next week. Love you guys. Take care.